Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. A warmer winter is coming. Now, this means a few things. Power bills might ease up for those of us who are heater dependent during chilly nights, which is a positive, right? However, these conditions won't be great for those heading away for ski season, and while the puffer jackets can stay in the wardrobe perhaps, those rain ones will be getting a workout because with a warmer winter comes rain. Today on The Front Page, Niwa forecaster Chris Brandolino is with us to give us a glimpse into what the weather might look like in the months ahead. Chris, it felt like we had a very wet autumn. Every week there was some warning over thunderstorms or severe rainfall. So exactly how wet was it?
It depends on where you were. Now, look, we'll be issuing our autumn climate summary, which is a retrospective look at the autumn season, March, April, May. That'll come, I think, later this week, let's say, maybe Thursday, I believe. But just in the spirit of a sneak peek for friends, it really depends on where you were. So, for example, Northland, was quite wet. So Kaitaia had 175% of normal rainfall. Typically, Kaitaia will get about 331 millimeters of rain, but they had well over 500 millimeters of rainfall for the autumn season. So it was pretty wet there. But look, if you go to places in different parts of the North Island, for example, if you were to go to, say, Mount Ruapehu, right, at the chateau, they only had 204 millimeters. That's only a third of what they normally get. So quite low rainfall there. Likewise, in Thames, they only had 76% of normal. But you're right, there were certainly a lot of places. Nelson, I'm just looking and scanning my list in front of me, over toward Winchmore and over toward Lincoln, Broadfield, Christchurch had a pretty wet autumn. And a lot of that was off the heels of, say, one or two big rain events. So, yeah, it was certainly wet for many areas of New Zealand for the autumn season, but it was not wet everywhere.
Was it unusual, the places that did experience a wet autumn? I know autumn and winter can obviously be wet seasons, but the severity of it in some places seemed a little unusual. Yeah,
again, there were couple big rain events we had, and that caused some flooding. Think of what happened in Nelson with those downpours back in late May, and that was a very short but sharp rain event. And, we had a lot of rain falling in just 3 or 4 hours. We had some flooding. I think we had parts of Northland had some minor to modest flooding going back to earlier in the autumn season. So, I don't think there were the really high-end rain events that caused significant flooding. We did have the big rain event in Christchurch, that one event that maybe is a standout in terms of flooding. So if you remember Banks Peninsula and areas around Christchurch, they had a state of emergency, and they had, I think 1-2 times normal what they would typically get in April, but it fell in basically a couple days. So you double the amount what falls in 30 days, but you're getting it in a couple days, and, we get some big problems. We had the red warning for Wellington. That was for the wind event, so that wasn't really rain. That was a strong wind event there. So it was an active autumn, but like a lot of times it came in fits and stops. We had some extended periods of dry weather. We had dryness and drought going back to the late summer, early autumn in places like Taranaki, places like southwest Waikato and the Manawatu King Country had some pretty dry conditions. And some of those areas are still seeing dry soils right now, particularly in the Manawatu region. Soils are unusually dry for the time of year.
Hello there. Well, winter is upon us, but of course, what can we expect? You know what? You may need to buckle your seatbelts. It could be a wild ride. There's going to be a bit of everything into the mix as far as things go. We could have, of course, some pretty good storms. We could have some cold outbreaks, good for the skiers, and we're going to get some fine days as well. When we look at the atmosphere, there's going to be lots of variety. So we're going to mix things around. It's like some flour, some extra sugar, mix it round, throw in some spice, and boom, you get all those things going on, warmer than normal.
So let's look ahead to winter. I've seen that it's going to be warmer than usual, but still quite wet. So what sort of weather systems are we looking at here?
So you're right. A couple ways to answer that. So in summary, we are expecting a warmer than average winter as a whole. Now, I'm using my words carefully, as a whole, because if you've seen the weather predictions for later this week and the weekend, there is going to be a significant cold snap. And, you may be thinking, well, geez, Chris, you said it was going to be a warmer than average winter. How why is it going to be so cold this weekend? Well, both can be true. That's because we give a 3-month outlook, not a 3-day outlook. So a 3-month outlook, there is a lot of water to pass under that bridge. And this is just one weekend of 13 for the winter season, right? So we are expecting this pretty big cold snap Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and that may come with some snow to low levels. We'll see. Even if the snow to low levels or a meaningful amount of snow to low levels does not occur Friday into Saturday, it will be darn cold. A squally day on Friday with showers and thunderstorms, maybe some hail. But unfortunately, if you're a skier or a snow enthusiast, or if you like cold temperatures for that matter, I don't think that cold snap that we're going to see from Friday into the weekend is going to have much staying power. And we're probably going to warm back up. And that will be the theme for the winter season. That is, yes, we'll get cold snaps, but we're probably going to get less of them than what is typical. And that is because we're expecting airflows for the winter season, less southerlies. So look, you don't have to be a Niwa meteorologist. You don't have to be a rocket scientist. It ain't going to get cold if you don't have a cold wind direction. It's very simple in that regard. Now, the trick, of course, is trying to isolate and determine and pick what is that overall wind direction going to be, and that can be challenging. Our sense is that, there will be southerlies, but they're going to be more infrequent than usual. So we're not going to see a lot of them. We'll see more northeast and northwest winds than usual. So again, more northeast and northwest winds than usual. Doesn't mean every day, every week, every month or hour of the winter. It just means more than what is typical, and that will drive temperatures up. Also, our ocean temperatures are running warmer than average around New Zealand, and that means it'll be hard to sustain prolonged cold snaps. The one we're going to see this upcoming late week, and especially this weekend, which may kind of sneak into Monday, that will last 3 or 4 days or so. But we're not going to see these cold snaps that last 6, 7, 8, 9 days. It's just not going to happen. Be very unlikely anyway, I should say.
Yeah, when we speak about a warmer winter, I'm Australian, so I think anything under 18 is cold.
Sure.
So what kind of temperatures are we talking when we're saying it's warmer than usual?
It depends. Like, it depends on where you are, what you call home. But just by way of example, the winter average. So this is a lot of assumptions. So we're smoothing things out over 3 months, right? And we all know how there can be variability. Look, this is a climate. I'm going to answer your question. Just give me a second. This is a climate outlook. What we're attempting to do is predict Mother Nature's personality over a 3-month period, right? Weather is Mother Nature's mood. Now, if we kind of get Mother Nature's personality correct, or at least in the right direction, on more days than not, the mood will align itself with the personality, but on some days it won't. So there's a lot of smoothing, is what I'm saying. Now, the typical mean temperature, that's the average, for, say, Auckland for the winter season is 11.6 degrees. So that means if you take the high and the low for each day during winter, and you add it up and divide by, 91 days or whatever the number of days is, you would get 11.6. What we're saying is that the mean temperature for the winter season, our expectation is it'll be higher than that. Now, for Kaitaia, it's 12.5 degrees, but for Dunedin, it's 7.3. For Christchurch, it's about 7.5, 7.4. So what we're saying is that for the winter season, our expectation is that where we land come September 1st, winter is in the rearview mirror, the mean temperature will be higher than that. But that can come in many ways. Just like I can tell you, if you run a business, right? And I say, hey, for the next 3 months, for the winter, you're going to have above average profits. You're like, sweet, awesome. But does that mean every weekend is going to be above average profits? No. That could come in the form of one really crazy month where your profits are just out of control. You have crazy good profits for 1 month. And then the second month, maybe they're about average. They're okay. They're not great. They're not awesome. They're okay. And then the third month, they're below average. But guess what? Because that first month was so extraordinary high with profits, that really swamped out or muted out the other 2 months, which did have a factor. But when it all came out in the wash, it was still above average profits. Same with our temperature. We could have 1 month where it's so exceptionally warm, that the other 2 months, I don't want to say almost don't matter, but they become less relevant in terms of trying to influence what that final number is. So this is a longer term outlook, and these outlooks are trying to identify themes, and that theme is for warmer than average temperatures. And these things can be hard to communicate. And for someone listening to this, they can be like, what the heck does that mean? How can I make a decision? Well, what it means is that if we're going to see less cold snaps, now less cold snaps is not zero cold snaps, i.e. what will happen this weekend. Maybe it means you run your heater less frequently, okay? Maybe it means that you can enjoy more days outside and not be so cold, more days than usual anyway. Maybe it means if you're a snow enthusiast, if you're a snowboarder, if you're a skier, well, maybe that means you're simply not going to have a great season, potentially. I think the North Island ski fields may be especially challenged. We'll see what happens for the South Island ski fields. A warmer than average winter for South Island ski fields. Well, if you're high enough in the altitude, it could still be warmer than average, but still cold enough for snow.
In Europe, they had to use helicopters and trucks to carry snow to the bare slopes in order to stay open. And in Japan, energy costs were so high that they had to keep the machinery shut down and just wait for natural snow to fall down the sky. Snow cover is projected to shrink globally as the planet warms, so this is a challenging future for ski resorts.
How concerning is it that the temperatures will be kind of warmer than usual? Is that another sign of climate change, or does it just happen every now and again?
Yeah, both are true. Look, grass will grow by itself, right? Throw in fertilizer, that's a much different story. It can overcome a lot. Same thing with athletes. Athletes are high performing. They're talented people. You give them HGH or steroids, they can perform a lot better. Look, climate change doesn't cause extreme weather. Here's what climate change does. 3 simple things. It makes extreme events more likely. It makes extreme weather events more frequent. And it makes them more extreme. More likely, more frequent, more extreme. I didn't say it creates them. It does not create them, because this has always happened in the past. We've always had extreme events. And what is an extreme event? It could be too much rain, too little rain, both ends of the spectrum. Really high temperatures, really active weather. So climate change, because of a warmer Earth, that energizes the atmosphere, and you tend to hit those extremes more likely to hit them, more frequent, and those extremes can be more, extreme. How concerning is it? Well, warmer than usual winters, it's become almost background noise, because I think a lot of people are used to hearing it. At least that's my sense. Maybe I'm wrong. And what happens is that maybe it becomes normalized, but in reality, when we see warmer than average conditions and you see the trend, that's the concerning part, is you see how these are becoming more common, more frequent. So look, unfortunately, a winter in 2025, if it turns out to be warmer than average as a whole, again, that's over a 3-month period when you're smoothing out the peaks and the valleys. When you compare it to a winter in, say, 2090, so 2090, that may actually be a cool winter. So in other words, if you take winter 2025, if it turns out to be warmer than usual, and you pop it into a time machine, and you exit that said time machine, and you're in the year 2090, and you're armed with winter 2025, odds are that'll be a cool winter.
And finally, Chris, I know that we always ask you this when you're on, but can you look into your crystal ball, and do we know anything about what spring and summer might look like yet?
Dark nights, bright days? Does that work? Yeah, look, when you're going out several months, 3 months, that's a challenge. But when you go out 6, 9 months, you can imagine that's even more challenging. So the short answer is there's a little bit of insight. The longer answer is what you need to do, what a person like myself who's in this sort of business, is you try to identify a climate driver. And we do this with even our 3-month outlooks. And a climate driver basically is, well, who's at the steering wheel of Mother Nature's car? Who's driving the car? If you know who's driving the car, odds are you know which direction you're going to favor or lean toward. Now, at the moment, we're not in La Nina or in El Nino. You've probably heard of those things, especially El Nino. Those are climate drivers. We call that ENSO, E-N-S-O, ENSO. It stands for El Nino Southern Oscillation. It basically means, are we in El Nino, are we in La Nina, or what's in the middle, which is neither? Right now, we're in neither. We're in neutral. However, we are coming out of La Nina, which was last summer, and there is forecast to be this La Nina, I don't want to call it a hangover, that'd be La Nina kind of tendencies, these La Nina-like conditions. We like to put things in nice even bins and keep a clear cut. In reality, life is not a light switch. It's a spectrum. It's not on or off. There's a lot of spots between 0 and 1 on and off. And it's the same thing with ENSO, El Nino Southern Oscillation. So while technically we are in neutral, we're actually on the La Nina side of neutral. Okay, well, what does that mean, smart guy? Well, typically when we have La Nina, we tend to favor airflows coming from the northeast, the east, the north, somewhere in that direction. And that tends to favor wetness for the eastern and northern North Island, tends to favor dryness for the western part of both islands, which is why we had that dryness and drought for the western North Island. If we recall, Taranaki, Waikato were quite dry. Even western parts of the South Island. They had a great summer, by the way. If you talk to people in Westport, Hokitika, and Haast, Fjordland, great summer, sunshine and warm temperatures, dry weather. And the indications are that sort of airflow may be favored as we work away into spring or summer. So this warm theme may persist if our airflows don't come from a cold direction, i.e. south or southwest, something like that. And that may favor wetness for northern and eastern parts of the country as we work away into the spring and summer season.
Thanks for joining us, Chris.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, and hopefully that was useful.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is produced by Ethan Sills and Richard Martin, who is also our sound engineer. I'm Chelsea Daniels. Subscribe to The Front Page on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, and tune in tomorrow for another look behind the headlines.